We thank you for coming to our second lecture series of the Foundation of a Republic. And we are very appreciative, and we thank Gettysburg College for giving us this venue this evening. And we feel that it's a joint venture between Gettysburg College and the Adams County Republican Committee, and it's a small way of giving back to the community and also a way of sharing our unique, wonderful history of our country. And we appreciate very much you being here. Tonight, it would not be possible without the guidance and the input of Dr. Mott and Dr. Shannon, and I thank you both very much for this. I think they deserve a round of applause. I first learned about the Federalist Papers 30 years ago when they had introduced a bill to make Washington, D.C. a state. And it just upset me, but I didn't know why it upset me. And somebody pointed me to the Federalist Papers, and it's all there. And I marveled at this collection of things that I never even knew anything about. And so it was a wonderful experience just to discover them, but it is rather laborious to read them, especially in their language. But anyway, it's great stuff. Anyway, I first learned about you about 30 years ago, Dr. Mott, but that was when you were 2. And that you were a teacher here at Gettysburg College, but I never actually had the opportunity to meet you until the Eisenhower series and that kind of thing. And, but I've always known you to be an institution in your own right in Gettysburg College. And you have introduced many young people to the process. And I believe the process is one of the most important things we need to perpetuate. So I thank you for that, and it's an honor for me to introduce you tonight. And you've already met Dr. Shannon, so let's go for it.
And I thought we would start off just by talking a little bit about, what exactly are the Federalist Papers. As Betsy indicated, they can be a tough read, and some of you may have read them perhaps in your undergraduate years, political science or history, or some of you may have tried to pick them up on the side and just make your way through them. There are 85 essays published in New York newspapers in 1787, 1788. This is during the period when the Constitution was being debated and ratified. And so they were published with the specific purpose of encouraging New Yorkers to support the Constitution. And New York was a key state in the ratification process. They were authored by John Jay, who wrote 5 of them, Alexander Hamilton, who wrote 51 of them, James Madison, who wrote 26 of them, and then Madison and Hamilton collaborated on 3 of them. So if we're going to put this in pop cultural terms, we can think of Madison and Hamilton as the Lennon and McCartney of the Federalist Papers, writing their own and then collaborating on a few. And poor John Jay is kind of the George Harrison. He gets to throw a song in periodically. And the major themes that run throughout all 85 of these essays are the importance of preserving the federal union in face of foreign and domestic enemies that the United States was facing in 1787, 1788. Criticism of the Articles of Confederation, which were, of course, the first constitution of the new nation, and of the state governments. And a defense of the Constitution's provisions for the separation of powers, the system of checks and balances between the federal and state governments, and the representation, the quality of the representation that was going to be afforded to the people in this new Constitution. Now, they are really, I think, one of the great works of the 18th century Enlightenment that people know about, but very few people have actually read cover to cover. This was a great time, the 1770s, 1780s, for magisterial works that have endured in the Western canon, but that very few people today actually want to sit down and read. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations is a good example of this. Edward Gibbon's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is another example of this. The Federalist Papers kind of falls into that same category. And part of the problem is, as Betsy indicated, that it's not exactly the kind of book that you want to bring to the beach with you and read, because of passages like this from one of the most important of the Federalist Papers, number 39. This is James Madison. The proposed Constitution, therefore, is in strictness neither a national nor a federal Constitution, but a composition of both. In its foundation, it is federal, not national. In the sources from which the ordinary powers of government are drawn, it is partly federal and partly national. In the operation of these powers, it is national, not federal. In the extent of them, again, it is federal, not national. And finally, in the authoritative mode of introducing amendments, it is neither wholly federal nor wholly national. So we got that cleared up, right? We can all go home. And you can understand why historians, you won't be surprised to hear this, historians tell us that when it came to the actual debates in New York, very few people were quoting the Federalist Papers during the ratification convention. You know, I think people then may have had a harder time getting through them as we do today. So why bother reading them today? And this gets to this issue, which is still very current in our society, which is, well, what did the founders mean? What did the founders want? What was their intention, their purpose, when they drafted the Constitution in May to September of 1787? And this is also often framed in the context of the word originalism. That is, that the best way to interpret the Constitution is to try to decipher its original meanings. Generally speaking, constitutional scholars and judges fall in two categories. There are the strict constructionists who argue that in order for the Constitution to do its job, the powers of the federal government should extend no further than are explicitly stated in the Constitution. The purposes and intents of the founders must guide our application of the document to modern life. The chief proponent of this strict constructionist approach today would be Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. On the other side, there are loose constructionists who like to refer to the Constitution as a living document that must be reinterpreted and adapted by each successive generation to meet the needs of a changing society. Both sides end up arguing over this point of original intent. They need to go to the sources to find out exactly what was it that the founders meant. And when you go to the sources, one of the things you quickly realize, what makes this such a complicated process, is that you can't talk about original intent. You need to talk about original intents. You need to use the plural, because a lot of people were involved in the drafting and ratification of the Constitution. And if you want to know what they thought, there's a very limited number of sources that you can consult. One is James Madison's Notes of Debates in the Federal Convention. Madison kept the most complete set of notes during the convention between May and September of 1787 in Philadelphia. Remember, when these guys, these 55 delegates, convened in May of 1787 to draft the Constitution, they locked the door and they closed the windows. And they took an oath to each other that they would not talk about what they were doing until they were done. And so there was essentially a news blackout. There was no day-to-day newspaper coverage or anything like that of what was actually going on. So Madison's Notes of the Debates is our most complete set of reporting from what was actually happening in those months. But it's fragmentary, and it was not published until 1840, after Madison's death. The other source we can go to is the correspondence of the founders. Letters that were written back and forth between them as the Constitution was being debated. And I'll cite some of these in our lecture tonight. Some of them are really fascinating, because in private correspondence, people wrote in a way that was unguarded. Two very important figures were not present at the Constitutional Convention who figured prominently in this. Thomas Jefferson was minister to France at the time this was going on. So he was writing back and forth with Madison. And John Adams was minister to Great Britain. And so he was weighing in on some of this stuff with his correspondence as well. The state ratification debates. All the states convened ratification conventions. There was press coverage of those, much more press coverage than what went on during the convention in Philadelphia. And those are a wonderful source. And if you're really into this, I recommend that you read them. You can find them in the college library. You can find them online. For some states, like New York, they're voluminous. For other states, they're very brief. But it will really give you a sense of what's going on. And then, lastly, the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, the Federalist Papers is this collection of 85 essays with those 3 authors. The Anti-Federalist Papers are simply newspaper editorials and pamphlet literature that was published to counter the argument made in the Federalist. So why should we talk about the Anti-Federalist Papers? After all, they lost the battle, right?